This weekend at the box office, Captain Marvel soars its way to number 1 with a $153 million opening weekend, despite some social media backlash against the film and its star Brie Larson. Elsewhere, Apollo 11 manages a safe landing on the surface of the top 10. All this and more on this episode of The Weekend Take.
You're listening to The Weekend Take, and now your host, Sean Schaefer.
Hello everyone and welcome to The Weekend Take. I'm your host, Sean Schaefer. Joining me later in the episode is Eric Vollweiler, producer and marketing consultant for film festivals and entertainment events. For those of you new to the show, what The Weekend Take is, it's a weekly podcast that breaks down the weekend box office results, but looks beyond the numbers at the current trends and topics of the film industry. We'll start off our episode the way we do every week by looking at the films that left the top 10. This week, there were two such instances of films that left the top 10. The first film to leave the top 10 this week is Happy Death Day to You, which dropped from the number 10 position to number 13. Happy Death Day to You from Universal took in $859,000, a 65% drop from last week. It lost over half of its screens, losing 1,233 screens to bring its count down to 1,098. The film averaged $782 per screen and has brought its cume up to $26.7 million in its fourth week of release on a $9 million budget. The other film that left the top 10 this week was What Men Want from Paramount, dropping from the number 9 position down to number 11. What Men Want took in $1.2 million, a 56.6% drop from last week. It lost nearly half of its screens, losing 956 screens to bring its count down to 1,062. A $1,130 per screen average brings its cume up to $51.9 million in its fifth week of release on a $20 million budget. With both of these films, seeing them leave the top 10 in only their fourth and fifth week of release respectively is a bit of a surprise. Looking at Happy Death Day to You, one of the main talking points has been the fact that the original film opened in October, prime time for horror movies, and went on to gross over $150 million worldwide, while the sequel opened quietly in February. Even as of this recording, Happy Death Day to You, as I mentioned, is only up to $26.7 million, which almost matches the opening weekend of the first film. One of the questions is what is Universal thinking in this, and what was their strategy if they had one? Granted, Universal's been around for many, many years. They know what they're doing. There seems to be a method to their madness, but in this case, it certainly did not live up to its potential, whatever strategy they had. Maybe they wanted to release the film quietly because they weren't as confident in its potential box office performance. I don't know, but when looking at the original, and over $150 million also made for a genre horror film's budget, and how profitable that was, it seems like the smart play would have been to release again in October, which has become a staple for a lot of horror films. The Saw and Paranormal Activity franchises thrived off of recurring October releases. At one point, the Saw franchise's tagline was, "If it's October, it must be Saw." Universal deciding to release Happy Death Day to You in February, when the first was so successful in October, is a bit of a head-scratcher. With What Men Want, one of the things that is a head-scratcher for this film is the film has star power between Taraji P. Henson and Tracy Morgan, who a lot of people are very happy to see back on the screen following his accident some years ago. And the film is trending very well. It has an A- on CinemaScore. Granted, critics aren't as receptive to it. It only has a 46% on Rotten Tomatoes for critic score, but the people buying the tickets and putting their butts in the seats are the ones that matter as far as I'm concerned. So seeing What Men Want leave the top 10 already was a bit of a surprise. But in both of these cases, losing the number of screens that they did, and the reason why they lost the screens that they did was likely to make room for our number 1 release later in the countdown, Captain Marvel, which opened on over 4,300 screens. It's not that surprising to see that these films would be the collateral damage, as they're the oldest outside of the Academy Award-winning Green Book, which is in its 17th week of release. Out with the old and in with the new, I suppose.
Number 10.
So now we'll get into our top 10. And at number 10 this week, up from number 15 in its first week of expansion, is Apollo 11 from Neon, which took in $1.3 million. The film saw a 19% drop from last week, but it gained 285 screens to bring its count up to 405. The film averaged just over $3,200 per screen, and after 2 weeks in release has brought its cume up to $3.7 million. Now for distributor Neon, which earlier this year had a complete flop in what was expected to be a big release film in Vox Lux, starring Natalie Portman and Jude Law, this has to be a welcome sigh of relief for Neon, as Vox Lux only took in about $700,000 its entire theatrical run. Now granted, it didn't open on nearly the number of screens that Apollo 11 did, but the early test screenings prove that maybe they didn't have such a winner on their hands with Vox Lux. They were hoping for an award season's darling, given that Natalie Portman has already won an Academy Award, and that just didn't play out the way they expected. But with Apollo 11, this takes a completely different direction as it is a documentary, unlike Fox Lux, but Neon is also known for some successful documentaries. Namely, in 2018, Three Identical Strangers was a release of Neon. That went on to make $12 million domestically and get nominated for Best Documentary Feature. Apollo 11 is obviously a documentary looking at the Apollo 11 mission, which saw Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin set foot on the surface of the moon, using archived footage and interviews to bring to life the narrative of what a courageous and daring venture this was for NASA, for this crew, and for this space shuttle mission. Helps to draw a tense narrative as to what was going on behind the scenes and not just what we saw on our televisions for the moon landing in 1969. With such a good per-screen average of over $3,200 and in its first week of expansion, it'll be interesting to see if this film expands further or if we'll be discussing it next week as leaving the top 10. Either way, Apollo 11 from Neon gives us a documentary that is both educational and entertaining and is certainly worth a look.
Number 9.
Moving on to number 9 this week, down from number 8 is Greta from Focus Features, which took in $2.1 million, a 51.8% drop from last week. Now, the film did manage to gain 6 screens to bring its count up to 2,417. The film had an $894 per screen average and has brought its cume up to $8.2 million in its second week of release. With Greta from Focus Features, my initial reasoning for wanting to see the film was that it was a release from Focus Features, which recently has been putting out a lot more films that both interested and intrigued me to check out. But after my discussion with Ellen Adair last week and learning that Neil Jordan was the director of the film, whose other credits include The Crying Game, Michael Collins, and The Butcher Boy, that certainly piqued my interest to see it, as well as leading lady Chloe Grace Moretz, who has played a number of roles and has just grown up in front of us on screen. And now to see her playing in this taut psychological thriller, something that's a bit outside of her comfort zone, but I'm sure is well within her range and capability, make this a film that is on my list of movies to see before ending its theatrical run. And as far as its theatrical run is concerned, yes, it did add screens this week, but my concern is that even with adding screens, it still has a 52% drop this week, and an $894 per screen average is not a positive sign. It'll be interesting to see next week because theaters are typically contractually obligated to have a film for 2 weeks, and after 2 weeks, it's up to their buyers and exhibitors whether they want to continue to carry the film. So seeing what kind of theater drop this film takes next week will determine whether we report about this being still in the top 10 or report about it leaving the top 10. Either way, I do hope to get a chance to see this film before it leaves.
You're listening to The Weekend Take. Visit our Patreon page to become a patron of The Weekend Take, and for as little as $1, you'll receive exclusive content and perks. Number 8.
Moving on to the countdown now, we're up to number 8. Down from number 5 is Fighting with My Family from MGM, which took in just under $2.2 million this week, a 53% drop from last week. The film lost 400 screens to bring its count down to 2,455 and had a per-screen average of $892. Again, not a positive note given that Greta's per-screen average was $894, but for Fighting with My Family, it's brought its cume up to $18.6 million, nearly $10 million more than Greta in its 4th week of release. For Fighting with My Family from MGM, which is a loosely based biopic on WWE superstar Paige, following her story from her youth growing up in a very wrestling-oriented family, her mother and father, both performers, and running a wrestling promotion in England, following her career accolades and highlights. One of my reasons for wanting to see this film is having been a fan of WWE product and following Paige's career in what felt like real time, watching her make her way onto the main roster, all of which are events that appear to be seamlessly recreated for the film. I'm curious to see just how far along in her career the film takes it. At the time of the production of the film, Paige was rehabbing from having had neck fusion surgery on her spine, and more recently, since the film's completion, Paige has had to retire from the ring as an in-ring performer at the age of 25 because of these injuries. So without looking up what I would consider a spoiler, I would like to see how far into her career and how current the film gets. But for Fighting with My Family from MGM, seeing that it only had an $892 per screen average this week and it's in its 4th week of release, I imagine that we'll see a pretty steep decline in theater count next week. This week, only a small drop, 400 screens, but I feel like that number will be much larger when we report next week, and we may even be reporting about this film leaving the top 10 as well.
Number 7.
Moving on to the countdown now, we're at number 7, and staying at number 7 this week is Isn't It Romantic from Warner Brothers, which took in $2.4 million, a a 46.6% drop from last week. The film lost about a third of its screens, losing 1,102 screens to bring its count down to 2,223, a just under $1,100 per screen average, and it has brought its cume up to $44.1 million in its fourth week of release. Isn't It Romantic from Warner Brothers stars Rebel Wilson as a woman who wakes up one morning and finds herself inside of a romantic comedy film, complete with all the pratfalls and tropes that we have come to know and love or hate from romantic comedies. Part of the attraction to this film, I think, is the self-aware nature of the comedy. It knows that it's a romantic comedy film. It's poking fun at romantic comedy films, all while still following through the story arc of a romantic comedy for leading lady Rebel Wilson. What surprises me about Isn't It Romantic is that it's held in as long as it has. I had just assumed after Valentine's Day weekend that it would have taken a steep decline and we'd already have been discussing it leaving the top 10. However, it's hung in there. It's still at number 7 for the second week in a row. It's at $44.1 million, which is a respectable number. However, given the fact that the film had a $31 million budget and it has no foreign gross to speak of, probably not the happy ending Warner Brothers was looking for. The film itself has a 70 on Rotten Tomatoes from critics and a B on CinemaScore, so people are more favorable to it than not. But with 3 wide releases coming out next week, it's not unreasonable to assume that we'll be reporting about Isn't It Romantic leaving the top 10 when we'll report back to you next week.
Number 6.
Moving on to the countdown now, we're up to number 6. Staying at number 6 for the second weekend in a row is Green Book from Universal. The Academy Award winner for Best Picture took in just under $2.5 million, a 45.6% drop from last week. It lost 544 screens to bring its count down to 2,097, with a per-screen average of just under $1,200 per screen, and has brought its cume up to $80.1 million in its 17th week of release on a $23 million budget. Now for Green Book, I happened to check this film out last night, and I found it to be quite enjoyable, but stemming off of my conversation about the film with Ellen Adair last week, I did feel that it was an adequate film, as she put it. I felt that it had a good story, the performances were stellar, but I felt it was just safe enough for the Academy to give this film Best Picture. And I say that because the Academy was already reeling and up against the ropes from such blows as dealing with the Kevin Hart situation and him leaving as the host and stepping down, to dealing with the backlash from exhibitors for giving 10 nominations for Roma, to deciding that they were going to not include 4 primary categories in their broadcast this year to save time in the backlash they received from industry professionals. I think for the Academy, they had to make some concessions. And in doing so, they made the concession of, okay, we're not going to go to one extreme and give Best Picture to BlacKkKlansman, because we've largely ignored Spike Lee in his career up to this point, despite making the films that he's made. We give him the nomination for Best Director, we give him the nomination for Best Picture, and that's the concession we're going to make. We're not going to actually give him either of those awards. So they weren't going to go to that extreme, but they weren't going to go to the other end of the spectrum of extreme and give Best Picture to Roma, especially after the exhibitors expressed their displeasure with the Academy giving the nominations to Roma and the questionable eligibility requirements that Roma met to get nominated. Going so far as European exhibitor Cineworld withdrawing its support from BAFTA after its nominations of Roma. So I think for the Academy, Green Book was the safe choice. It dealt with race relations just to the extent that it made it topical. It had great performances from leads Viggo Mortensen and Mahershala Ali. It had good comedic elements. It had good, even family elements. I mean, the film ends on Christmas with a very Christmas movie-like ending of everyone coming together and the acceptance of everyone by all. I understand where the Academy was like, wow, this film is right here at the right time for us to be like, yes, please have this Best Picture award. That's not to discredit the film. I enjoyed it a great deal. I thought Mahershala Ali was incredibly deserving of the Academy Award that he received. I think Viggo Mortensen, we take a bit for granted because he's consistently good. And in watching Green Book, you could see where he almost restrained himself from possibly outshining Mahershala Ali, because it's Mahershala Ali's character's story. It's not the story of Tony Lip. Viggo Mortensen likewise restrained himself just so to give a great performance, but not in the scenes that were Dr. Shirley's scenes to outshine him as Tony Lip. I think that in itself shows a great discipline of character and as a professional and as a performer for Viggo Mortensen. And I think that we take for granted that he is just consistently good in everything he does, whether the film itself is good or not. In this case, there's a good film here in Green Book. Best Picture worthy? Questionable, but a great film nonetheless. So now looking at Green Book moving forward, it's lost 544 screens this week. It's 17 weeks in release. It got a theater bump because of the Best Picture win. Where it goes from here, I'm not entirely sure, but for Green Book, this is a big W for them. Not only as an award winner, but at the box office. It's award winner for Universal. I mean, $23 million budget, $80 million domestic, added with another $162 million foreign for a $242 million worldwide gross, and 3 Academy Awards to boot. This is a surefire win for Universal. Check out Green Book. Certainly a film worth watching.
You're listening to The Weekend Take. Visit our Patreon page to become a patron of The Weekend Take, and for as little as $1, you'll receive exclusive content and perks.
Joining me this week on The Weekend Take as my special guest is Eric Vollweiler, who is a producer and marketing consultant for film festivals and entertainment events. Eric, how are you doing?
Good. How are you? And thank you so much for having me on the show today.
I'm doing well, thank you. It's a pleasure to have you on. So, Eric, for the people listening, can you explain to us a little more about what a producer and marketing consultant is for film festivals and entertainment events?
Basically, my job, first and foremost, is to raise money, so fundraising, by selling sponsorships and advertising to finance film festivals and entertainment events. Besides that, I am also involved with public relations, booking entertainment professionals to speak on panels. I also do social media, and I do production on film festivals and entertainment events as well.
How does one go about matching the right sponsor with the right event?
Well, it's interesting. The film festival world caters to a higher income level audience. Sometimes you think outside of the box. You're not always going after camera companies, sound companies, lighting, grip, entertainment payroll, entertainment insurance companies, which are all good markets for film festivals, but I'll go after banks, insurance companies, law firms, real estate, jewelry stores, car dealerships, airlines, hotels, resorts. The list goes on of people that want to market to that higher income level audience.
Are you a part of the group that talks with these sponsors and about who wants to contribute to the swag bags or just contribute things to the attendees?
When selling sponsorships overall, the swag bag is one of the items that they'll be able to purchase in their package. There's so many different items that potential sponsor can purchase, and it really depends on what they're trying to sell and brand.
I myself and this show are trying to always, week after week, grow who our audience is and reach out to potential sponsors. So that may be a conversation you and I have. What are some of the bigger festivals that you've contributed to?
The Silver Lake Film Festival is one of my favorites. It was probably one of the largest film festivals I worked on. The films were incredible, and the parties, the panels that they had taking place were really good. And then, of course, I've done different events, not just working on film festivals, but parties at major film festivals. I just completed my second event at the Sundance Film Festival, which was a success. And, that's, of course, one of the largest film festivals. And it's kind of cool to go back there, as I was a volunteer at Sundance. I always say that's one of the first learning experiences on film festivals was at Sundance. Out of all the film festivals, I don't know. I mean, every one is different. I've been working on film festivals now for over 14 years in 9 different states. And my goal is just to keep on moving across the country and doing more states that I haven't worked in.
And I'm familiar with your work in the festivals firsthand, as you helped put together the Saratoga International Film Festival a couple years back, which I ran a panel on cinematography.
Yeah, that was for what we did there. That was a big success. We had over 400 film submissions. We had over 1,000 attendees for our first year film festival. That was pretty amazing.
How far typically in advance do you start talking with a festival?
I'm actually booking into 2020 already. And what I mean by that, it's I'll be like a ghostwriter in a way. I'll jump onto an event either by providing prizes sometimes for film festivals for the filmmakers, or just jump in and see how much I can raise in a short term. And, usually it takes about 6 months to work on a whole festival fully and to really raise a good amount.
So given that it takes about 6 months, you're saying, kind of soup to nuts to put together a festival. Are you able to do multiple festivals concurrently, or is like, okay, I'm taking this 6 month block and I'm doing this festival, and then I'm going to do this 6 month block and do this film festival? Or can you do multiple festivals concurrently?
I would say in the last 2 years, 2017 and 2018, I worked on about 12 each year.
Oh, wow.
But again, I didn't work on full-time work on 12. It was more like jump on board to one and then do as much as I can, jump on board to the next, do as much as I can. The cool thing about what I do is that there's not a lot of other people that work in sponsorship towards film festivals, I've realized over the years. And it's basically me bringing money that they didn't have already to the table.
Looking at 2019, what is the next festival that you're going to be a part of, I guess, on the calendar year? So here we are, we're in March. What's next on the docket?
The Golden State Film Festival, it's the second year. It's coming up on March 22nd through the 28th, and it's taking place at the TCL Chinese Theater, which is one of the most famous theaters of all time.
Grauman's.
Right.
Grauman's Chinese Theater?
Yep.
Oh, yeah, of course. Whenever there's a big premiere or someone's getting a star on the Walk of Fame, you go to Grauman's for the ceremony. So that's fantastic. That's great. Congratulations.
Thank you. I'm a marketing consultant on that festival. And then in April, I have the Kansas City Film Fest International, April 10th through the 14th. And then I just took on an event. It's called the 2019 Producers Honors Awards. It's taking place April 17th at the Hard Rock Cafe in Las Vegas. And then the Artemis Women in Action Film Festival, which is in Beverly Hills and Santa Monica, April 25th through the 28th is when that's taking place. And then I have the 28th annual Woods Hole Film Festival in Cape Cod, and that's coming up July 27th through the August 3rd. And then I'm also part-time working on the Hip Hop Film Festival, which is in Harlem, New York, and that's August 1st through the 4th. And then the New York State International Film Festival in Albany. We don't have a date yet for it. And then the final festival will be the Fort Lauderdale International Film Festival, November 1st through the 17th, and that's in Fort Lauderdale.
So it sounds like with what you're doing, you get to do a fair amount of travel. I mean, do you make sure that you do an in-person kind of appearance at these festivals when they happen and when you're working on them?
Sometimes it depends on my contract with the festivals, but in the last couple of years, I have done a lot of traveling. This year, it's going to be, I think, a lot less traveling. I mean, I'm probably going to be going to Cape Cod this summer for the festival there. I might even go to Harlem for that festival as well. The last couple of years, 2017 and 18, were a lot more traveling than this year for sure.
Now, how about international film festivals? Do you get to dabble in those at all?
I'm in the process of seeing about producing a panel at Toronto this year in September. I have been to the Toronto International Film Festival, and it's a great festival for sure.
Aside from the sponsors stuff, you mentioned helping get people in panels together. How does one go about planning a panel for a festival?
When I focus on that, I look, what's the most important learning target for a filmmaker? So I'll do everything from like film financing, film distribution, entertainment law, entertainment insurance, screenwriting, casting, maybe have a couple filmmakers who have been successful on the film festival circuit. It really depends, but those are some of my strong topics. And then when researching, a lot of times I've worked with people that can talk about film distribution and film financing and entertainment law. So with film financing, there's entertainment attorneys. There's also filmmakers out there that have raised a lot of money that love talking about it as well and have written books. So you just try to find the best people. And the most important thing is for the filmmaker, as you know, from doing a workshop at Saratoga, that you want to educate the best and fully you can.
I'm sure what you do encompasses more than just festivals. I'm sure, is there any times when you're doing stuff that has to do with maybe conventions or other prominent like entertainment, basically any type of entertainment, like networking type events? Like, do you do those as well, or is it mostly festivals?
I mean, in the past, I have definitely done trade shows and conferences, galas. Besides trade shows, conferences, galas, parties at major film festivals. I've also done like music festivals. One of my first major events I did was in LA. It was the Youth Actors Expo, which was to educate parents about breaking into the entertainment industry the correct and legit way. And that was one of my favorite, first events I ever did. And then from there, I really got involved with film festivals after.
For yourself, having all this knowledge and network base, would you ever think about trying to start or found or create a festival yourself, or just kind of working under the banner of more established film festivals is more your cup of tea?
I think for right now, just working for established film festivals is really my focus.
Okay. Working around all these filmmakers and these festivals, do you yourself ever kind of get the itch to be the filmmaker to make the film, or what are your thoughts on that?
Not my thing. I did experience a couple of films, working on films in the past, as an associate producer or producer. Even I tried some acting back in the day, but I really like, producing the event itself that focuses around filmmakers and the performing arts.
And are there similar events that are around maybe like the stage and theater world that you've dabbled in, or is it mainly the motion picture industry?
I actually started with theater. I went to school. I was a performing arts theater major. So I really started in college. I was producing and marketing plays. So it's sort of marketing a play and producing a play is sort of marketing a film festival. It crosses over, as you know what I mean?
Eric, if someone wants to get in touch with you, connect with you on social media, how would they go about doing that?
You can find me on LinkedIn by Eric Vollweiler. I'm also on Facebook. I have a Facebook group called Film Festivals Produced and Marketed by Eric Vollweiler. And then you can also friend me on Facebook by searching for Eric Vollweiler.
And I'll be sure to put pertinent links in the episode description as well. So Facebook and LinkedIn, and there's a group for your work on festivals. I do want to thank you for spending some time with us and talking about what you do, and check out Eric on LinkedIn and on Facebook as well. Links will be in the description below for the episode. Thank you, Eric, for coming on the show and talking with us.
Thank you for having me, and I look forward to promoting the episode for you and promoting your show.
Well, thank you again, Eric. I'm going to get back into the countdown now, but thank you again, and I'll talk with you soon.
Thanks a lot.
You're listening to The Weekend Take. Visit our Patreon page to become a patron of The Weekend Take, and for as little as $1, you'll receive exclusive content and perks. Number 5.
Moving on to the countdown now, we're up to number 5. Down from number 3 this week is Alita, Battle Angel from Fox, taking in $3.2 million, a 55.7% drop from last week. The film lost just over 700 screens to bring its count down to 2,374. It had a $1,348 per screen average and brings its domestic cume up to $78.3 million and has brought its worldwide cume up to $382.6 million on a $170 million budget in its 4th week of release. So for Alita, what has been the talking point for a couple of weeks now, I really feel like it just released at a bad time. This was a film that was already delayed for nearly 2 years while we waited for story elements or different CGI effects to be corrected or replaced, namely Alita's eyes themselves having to have the proportion of pupil and iris changed to the real estate of the eye to make it a bit more pleasing to the early test audiences. And I get it, but for Fox to release a film of this magnitude, of this size budget, in February, when it typically is the dumping grounds for anything from a studio to be released, is just not smart strategy on the part of Fox. And I don't know if it's because Fox has resigned itself to being part of Mickey Mouse's empire now, as the acquisition of Fox by Disney will become official later in March. But Fox just kind of seems to be just rolling out whatever's on their slate. And I don't think that's fair to the films and all the people that worked on them. I mean, you look at earlier this year, they had The Kid Who Would Be King. $59 million budget, 3,500 screens opening, hardly any marketing, bombed horribly. Made, I think, $16 million domestically. Now you look at Alita Battle Angel, which sees itself in a very similar position to Pacific Rim. Now, Pacific Rim also, domestically, not a strong performer, saved by foreign gross. Alita finds itself in the same predicament, $78 million domestic, but $304 million in foreign gross. Now, I would hope that Alita also follows suit with Pacific Rim and still gets its sequel because of the foreign gross. Pacific Rim got a sequel because it was saved by foreign gross. I hope Alita does the same. I enjoyed Alita when I went to see it. I'm familiar with the source material. I'm a fan of the anime and the manga itself. So I'm hoping that this story continues, because especially the tease as to who the real villain is at the end of the film is one of my favorite actors, and I would love to see him on screen playing opposite Rosa Salazar or Christoph Waltz or any number of them. I would love to see him play that. I'm not going to give it away. Not going to spoil it for anybody. You have to go see it for yourself. But that reveal of who the real villain is at the end sets up what would be a great sequel. Please go check out the film if you can. And I suggest doing it soon, because with a 56% drop this week and a theater drop of 722 screens, I imagine that we're going to see a much larger drop next week. Don't think it's going to leave the top 10. It's going to take a big hit. And for those of you that have MoviePass still, yes, there are some of us that still have MoviePass. I won't for much longer, but those of us that do still have MoviePass, it is one of the films on their selected films list to see for free. So check it out. Give it a shot.
Number 4.
Moving on to the countdown now, we're up to number 4, and staying at number 4 for the second weekend in a row is the Lego Movie 2, the second part from Warner Brothers, taking in $3.8 million, a 42% drop from last week. It lost 528 screens to bring its count down to 2,930, a $1,300 per screen average to bring its cume up to $97.1 million in its fifth week of release on a $100 million budget. Now, for the Lego Movie 2, as we've been talking about the last couple of weeks, it's certainly underperforming to the rest of the Lego Movie universe films. Again, minus Lego Ninjago, because I feel that film has a story far enough removed from the universe that it can't be part of the canon, so to speak, of the Lego Movie universe. The primary films of this universe are Lego Movie, of course, Lego Batman, and now Lego Movie 2. And when you compare it to those films, which all released in February, all almost the same day and date in February, Lego Movie 2 falls very short. Just to put it into perspective, after 31 days in release, the Lego Movie 2, as I mentioned, is at $97.1 million. At this point in its release, at 31 days, the Lego Movie, the original, was at $224 million. So the Lego Movie 2 is trailing behind by $127 million. Even when looking at Lego Batman, at this point in its release, 31 days, Lego Batman was at $158.8 million, which means Lego Movie 2 is trailing $61 million behind that film. And it's not just in the US. You look at the foreign gross of these films, and so far worldwide, Lego Movie 2 has earned $164.4 million worldwide. For the entire run of Lego Movie, it made $469.1 million. For the entire run of Lego Batman movie, it made $311.9 million. Lego Movie 2 has already released in all of the markets that it's going to. Therefore, this film, if it's lucky, will reach $200 million foreign. It won't crack $100 million domestic, I don't believe, but I could be surprised by that. For Lego Movie 2, which I did go see, I took my daughter to see it a couple weeks ago. On the surface, Lego Movie 2 offers the same fun and enjoyment of the original Lego Movie and Lego Batman, but in its execution, sitting in the theater watching it, it falls short. The story is very scattered. It's not a very tightly told story. It's not a very well-told story either. There's musical numbers outside of Everything is Awesome that just are not good, and it's nothing against Tiffany Haddish, who plays the queen in this Lego world, but she's not a singer. The songs aren't good. They're not well engineered, and it's not. There's a lot of elements about this film that were lacking to me. My daughter enjoyed it for the most part. There are certain elements that you could tell she was a bit bored. That's not to say that it's not something that you should still take your kids to if it's something that they enjoy, but I don't think it's something that you need to go see in theaters. This is something you can definitely wait for it to be on Netflix or DVD or Blu-ray. So now looking ahead at the prognosis for Lego Movie 2, it doesn't look particularly good, especially with Wonder Park opening next week. That would make 3 wide-release, kid-friendly family films in the countdown, and being that Lego Movie 2 is the oldest of those 3, it stands to suffer the most. Look for a big drop for Lego Movie 2 this week. Again, not leaving the top 10. I don't see that being what happens, but I also don't see it recovering or rebounding from this. Only time will tell, and especially what will tell, we'll see what the theater count is next week when we report. My assessment of Lego Movie 2 is a little bit under what other metrics say. You look at the Rotten Tomatoes score, it's an 86. You look at the Cinema score, it's an A-. I don't think it's really either of those things. As someone who sees a lot of kids' movies, Lego Movie 2 wasn't exactly the cream of the crop. I don't think it's worth an A-. I think it's more of like a good B, but certainly not an A-. The best way I could put it is that Lego Movie 2 overpromises and underdelivers.
Number 3.
Moving on to the countdown now, we're up to number 3. Down from number 2 this week is Tyler Perry's A Madea Family Funeral from Lionsgate, taking in $12 million, a 55.5% drop from last week. It saw no change in its theater count, staying in 2,442 screens. It averaged just under $5,000 per screen to bring its cume up to $45.8 million in its second week of release. For Tyler Perry's swan song for the Madea character, we see it sitting at $45.8 million in its second week of release. Still has a great per theater average of $5,000. Looking at the series of Madea films, which include 9 total films, right now Madea Family Funeral sits in 9th place of the 9. Understandably so. It's only had 10 days of release, but it is going to creep up the charts pretty quickly, I think, as it's only $2 million away from Tyler Perry's Boo 2: A Madea Halloween. It's only $5 million away from Tyler Perry's Diary of a Mad Black Woman, which is the film that first introduced the Madea character. I imagine by the time I report next week that this film will creep from the number 9 position all the way up to number 5, possibly even number 4, because the other films in that countdown aren't that far off either. All that separates Madea Family Funeral from Tyler Perry's Madea Goes to Jail, which is currently the top grossing of the 9 Madea films, is $45 million. Madea Goes to Jail earning $90.5 million. Medea's Family Funeral, as I said, already at $45.8 million. Now, given looking at a 50% drop perhaps next week, that's $6 million just in the weekend alone. Just in that weekend will put the film from number 9 to number 5. Now take into account what it's going to make Monday through Thursday, and I do think that we're going to see this film hovering around the number 3, number 4 position by this time next week. By the end of its run, I don't think it takes number 1. I don't think the swan song gets the send-off it wants, which is to go out on top, but I do think it's going to be a solid and close number 2. Although I will add that with a $5,000 per screen average on its second week of release, coming from a $13,000 per screen average its opening frame, I don't think I see a big theater drop in the future for Madea Family Funeral. I think it's currently on 2,442 screens. I think it probably holds right around that number. Maybe loses a few screens because, as I mentioned, there are 3 wide releases coming out next week. Room has to be made. So every film on this countdown is going to be sacrificing screens. I think you'll see a drop from about 2,400 screens where it is now to, I'm going to guess, around 2,000 screens. I still think it's going to take in about $5 or $6 million next week. I do think it's going to move up the charts of the Madea franchise quickly. While it won't be number 1, it'll certainly be a close number 2.
You're listening to The Weekend Take. Visit our Patreon page to become a patron of The Weekend Take, and for as little as $1, you'll receive exclusive content and perks. Number 2.
Moving on to the countdown now, we're up to number 2. Down from number 1 is our defending box office champ for the last 2 weeks, How to Train Your Dragon: The Hidden World from Universal. This week, the film took in $14.7 million, a 51% drop from last week. The film lost 244 screens to bring its count down to 4,042 screens, had a per-screen average of just over $3,600, and has brought its cume up to $119.6 million in its third week of release on a $129 million budget. For How to Train Your Dragon: The Hidden World, what started off as a franchise best opening weekend of $57.5 million has cooled off rather quickly, as now it finds itself trending behind its 2 predecessors. Through 17 days in release, How to Train Your Dragon: The Hidden World has taken in $119.6 million. The first How to Train Your Dragon at this point in its release was at $133 million, and the second film was at $122 million. So it seems that franchise best opening weekend, which accounted for a large portion of the film's gross so far, also accounts for a large portion of the audience interest. The film sits at $435 million worldwide. That puts it almost at the total of the first film, which was $494 million, but it does put itself at a country mile away from the second film, which took in $621.5 million worldwide. Now, given that How to Train Your Dragon 3 opened 3 weeks prior to its domestic opening date in the rest of the world and has already opened in nearly every market that it's going to, I don't see How to Train Your Dragon 3 continuing the trend of each film making more than the previous one, which was the assessment that I made last week on the show talking with Ella Madea. It seems that the How to Train Your Dragon franchise is capable of franchise fatigue, as this film looks to make certainly less than the second film and possibly less than even the first film, both domestically and worldwide. And given that one of next week's wide releases is Wonder Park, a family animated film that caters to the same exact audience as How to Train Your Dragon: The Hidden World, I expect to see How to Train Your Dragon: The Hidden World's box office to take a pretty major hit next week. And although the film will be profitable for Universal, given that the budget was only $129 million, which is also the least that any of the How to Train Your Dragon films has cost to make, combined with its $435 million worldwide gross, much like the Madea franchise, How to Train Your Dragon will go out on a profitable note, but not necessarily a high note, as it won't be the biggest grossing film in the franchise. Despite its lackluster performance, I still intend on taking my daughter to see How to Train Your Dragon: The Hidden World, and I recommend other families do too, because if nothing else, the How to Train Your Dragon franchise has always promised and delivered on heartfelt stories, great characters, and stunning visuals, and this film is no exception.
Number 1.
And finally, coming in at number 1 this week, to the surprise of no one, is Captain Marvel by Buena Vista and Disney, taking in a monstrous $153 million on 4,310 screens. The film averaged nearly $36,000 per screen. Now, the $153 million domestic gross, coupled with its foreign opening, has brought the film's worldwide opening to $455 million in only 3 days of release. Now, Captain Marvel and its marketing is the first female-led Marvel film of the cinematic universe and from Marvel Studios, but also promises to be the thread that connects Avengers Infinity War from last year to Avengers Endgame coming out in April. The film itself was not released without some controversy, as Captain Marvel herself, Brie Larson, found herself in hot water after making some controversial comments. Namely, in June of 2018, while making a speech, Larson urged the film industry to promote women of color and marginalize white men, whom she says have dominated the industry for far too long, stating, and I quote, "I don't want to hear what a white man has to say about A Wrinkle in Time. I want to hear what a woman of color or a biracial woman has to say about the film. I want to hear what teenagers think about the film." She followed up discussing those comments in June of 2018 during an interview in February of 2019 with Marie Claire magazine, stating, "About a year ago, I started paying attention to what my press days looked like and the critics reviewing movies, and I noticed it appeared to be overwhelmingly white male. These comments resulted in some social media backlash from, namely, white males, who've gone so far as to trash on the film on Rotten Tomatoes, leading to the platform to have to change the way that they allow films to be reviewed, as these same, what I would call internet trolls, were going to the film's page on Rotten Tomatoes and downvoting the anticipation meter, leading it to look like not many people were really interested in seeing the film when it came out. Now, Rotten Tomatoes currently is a metric by which many people use to determine whether they think a film is good or not, based on critics and audience reviews. I know I look at Rotten Tomatoes when I'm seeing a film coming out before I go to watch it, and I mention Rotten Tomatoes and CinemaScore a number of times when talking about the films here on the countdown. So you can understand how a regular audience goer would look at Rotten Tomatoes and see such a poor score that resulted in so many downvotes by people who were so upset with Brie Larson's comments would lead them to believe, well, maybe the film isn't as good as they're leading it on to be if so many people don't want to see the film when it comes out. From a financial standpoint, you can see how this could possibly worry Marvel. Now, in my opinion, I don't think anything really worries Marvel. At this point, Marvel prints money. Every movie they put out is going to be a box office success. The last film they had that anybody had anything to say about negatively, really negatively, was Iron Man 3. You have to go back almost a decade to worry about that film. For movie studios and distributors, social media is a very powerful tool, one that they use every day in their promotion and marketing of their films and projects, but one that when turned against them to their detriment could provide cataclysmic results. Now, I don't think that's the case with Marvel here, but it doesn't mean that their fear is unfounded. Some members of the social media community went so far as to create boycott campaigns against Captain Marvel. Namely, there was the Alita Challenge, which urged moviegoers to go check out Alita Battle Angel instead of Captain Marvel this weekend, because in their opinion, Alita Battle Angel is an example of a strong, female-led film that doesn't suffer the off-screen fate of satisfying social justice warriors, as they put it, with their opinion being that there are ways to celebrate women heroines without bashing men. They bring up such examples as Alita Battle Angel or Wonder Woman. In both of these cases, these are strong, female-led films that don't have to go on a campaign against the other gender. Now, this isn't an opinion that I hold myself, but this is one that is out there in the news that could affect the performance of the film. I say could because it could have. It didn't. Captain Marvel opened to over $153 million. I don't think it was ever the case that no one was going to show up to Captain Marvel. Not when there's so much on the line. You're talking about the film that's going to connect the two biggest chapters of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. The latter being the conclusion of the first era of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, being Avengers Endgame. There's no way that people aren't going to go see this. So I don't think anything was going to really put that big of a dent in Captain Marvel. But that's not to say that other people aren't entitled to their opinion. No one's opinion means less than another person's opinion. And I think that's one of the problems that we come to in this day and age with social media and so many people who I would say, keyboard warriors, having their opinions and expressing their opinions. Now, we can agree to disagree. If people don't like what Brie Larson said, then they don't have to go see the movie. It doesn't mean that they have to urge everyone to not see the movie. I don't agree with that. I think that's taking vengeance out on the art when the person you're upset with is a player involved in the art. It took way more than just Brie Larson to make Captain Marvel. At some point, we have to separate the players from the art. In this case, Brie Larson is a player. Yes, she is the lead character in the film, but we shouldn't take out how we feel about Brie Larson and her viewpoints and her opinions, which she's entitled to if that's how she feels, out on the film itself. Much like right now, there's radio stations across the country, across the world, who are removing Michael Jackson's catalog from their stations in the wake of this recent documentary that's come out on HBO that goes into explicit detail about the allegations against him by these young men growing up and spending that much time at the Neverland Ranch. Now, do I think that what Michael Jackson may or may not have done was wrong? No, I think if that's what happened, if he did do that, then yes, that's a terrible thing. But I'm not going to take that out on him as an artist. I can still enjoy music if I don't like the person. I can still enjoy The Usual Suspects if I don't like Kevin Spacey and what he did. I can still enjoy a number of films and television programs that maybe have a bunch of shitty people attached to it. Great, those are shitty people. I don't have to like them, but what they do on screen, behind the camera, behind the scenes, to create art is a completely different world. And maybe people don't agree with me on that. I don't know. It's all art. Music is art. Film is art. Painting, art. If you found out tomorrow that Van Gogh was a serial rapist, I guarantee that yes, they would probably take some Van Gogh paintings out of the museums, but it wouldn't change your opinion of how you felt your entire life about that piece of Van Gogh art. I don't think that we should all forget the existence of Michael Jackson's music because maybe Michael Jackson did some questionable things. Plus, I don't know. The man's been dead for almost 10 years. He has no way to defend himself. And the last time he did have to defend himself, he was cleared of the convictions. With Captain Marvel and Brie Larson, it's not wrong of her to want to have other representation in the press junkets by asking for women and people of color. I don't think that's an unreasonable request. Could she have phrased it differently? Absolutely. She could have found a better way to put it than that. So now looking at Brie Larson in this light, because she says that she noticed a bunch of white men were at her press junkets, gets taken way out of proportion. And now people just assume, oh, well, she hates white men or she hates men. No, she's not saying that. And if she was saying that, I don't like white men. Okay, fine. Then she doesn't like white men. It's her opinion. We don't have to support her, but you don't have to enforce an opinion upon others to try and put to the detriment of art. What it comes down to for Captain Marvel is it's a film. It's a piece of fiction based on a comic book, also a piece of fiction. The fact that in real life, Brie Larson holds this opinion and had this request because it upsets people doesn't mean that we need to go on a crusade to bring down Brie Larson and bring down Captain Marvel. And it wasn't going to happen anyway. The film holds too important of an element of the story that we have been building to a conclusion for nearly 12 years. Now, the flip side of this is, I don't think that every time someone gets upset that we necessarily have to appease everyone. In the case of Captain Marvel and Rotten Tomatoes, taking down the anticipation meter because a bunch of internet trolls trashed the film and brought the score down to, I think it was like a 29% at the time that Rotten Tomatoes decided to take that feature off of their website. Let's be real. Anybody who's ever seen any Marvel film knows that there's no way that only 29% of the population wants to see Captain Marvel. It just wasn't going to work that way. At some point, we have to use common sense and rational thinking and assess the situation from a step back. If we get too involved and too close and personal to what's going on and make it personal, that's when problems arise. There's people out there saying that, oh, well, Captain Marvel and its marketing is just, they're using her being a female lead as a marketing gimmick. Yeah, You know what? You're damn right. They're using it as a marketing gimmick because it's the first female-led Marvel film in all of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. DC did it when Wonder Woman came out. The difference is that Gal Gadot didn't go out and say that she didn't like white men showing up at her press junkets and wanted more of a diverse representation. So nobody said boo when Wonder Woman came out. That also opened over $100 million. And that was heavily marketed in Wonder Woman's campaign, was that it was Wonder Woman, a strong female-led film that also had a female director. Patty Jenkins made history when Wonder Woman came out. It was the first female-directed film to open to over $100 million. All of this was part of the marketing. No one said boo about it, but because Brie Larson holds an opinion and a request to show more diversity in her press junkets, everyone loses their minds and everyone should just stop, okay? It's a movie. She is a celebrity. We put far too much emphasis on the opinions of celebrities. Everyone should just go back to minding their own business, live their life, and be who they are. And if Brie Larson says that she wants less white men and more women and people of color at her press junkets, then that's a request. She's allowed to have that request. If she's trying to be a proponent for change, which is a big theme of the last 2 or 3 years in Hollywood, is being a proponent for change, because I'm not going to hold back on this. I agree. The proportion of white men in the industry is very high. And this is coming from somebody who, as a near 36-year-old straight white male, I'm almost enemy number one in this progression of change. And yes, I get upset about it at times, but I don't think that their desire for change is entirely unfounded. I agree. There should be more women directors. There should be more women cinematographers. There should be more people of color behind and in front of the camera in leading parts and not just in token parts. I completely agree. But at the end of the day, it should be whoever is best for the job should be hired, and that people should be hired on their ability and their merit and not just on what box they check on what their ethnicity and sex is. But at the end of the day, Captain Marvel is a success. $153 million, the second biggest March opening ever behind Beauty and the Beast. And that's what we're here to talk about. All the other stuff that happened, all the stuff with Brie Larson and stuff, it's just talk. You know, on this show, we're looking at the performance of the film in the top 10, and we are looking beyond the numbers at topics and trends of the industry. And that's what I'm talking about here. But Brie Larson is entitled to her opinion. Now, if it fires people up, it fires them up. If they don't want to see the movie, then they don't have to see the movie. But I don't think anybody should make it their personal crusade to go out there and try and destroy a movie or someone's career because they don't agree with what they say. Take a look at yourself in the mirror and think about where you are at this station in life and work on that. Work on that first before you put so much importance in the opinions and a request of a celebrity. I think as a society, we put far too much emphasis on celebrity. Celebrities are just people who have better paying jobs than us, and they happen to do it in the public eye. If you don't like what they say, then you don't have to follow them. That's the beauty of social media. I can unfollow, block anybody I want. If I don't want to be bothered by looking at things, I don't have to be. I'm going to get off this soapbox now.
You're listening to The Weekend Take. Visit our Patreon page to become a patron of The Weekend Take, and for as little as $1, you'll receive exclusive content and perks.
Looking ahead now to next week, there are 3 major releases coming out. First is Captive State from Focus Features, which will open on over 2,200 screens. Also, we have 5 Feet Apart from Lionsgate, which will open on 2,600 screens, and Wonder Park from Paramount, which opens on 3,500 screens. Looking at the field and looking at Captain Marvel's performance, I think it's safe to say that Captain Marvel will be number 1 at the box office again next week. And so we'll be discussing the film again next week. And if anybody wants to add their 2 cents to what I said about the film, or all the controversy and things surrounding the film, feel free to write me a message, comment, whatever, and we'll talk about it again next week. But in the meantime, Captain Marvel will be number 1 again next week. I'm going to guess in the $65 to $70 million range for the second weekend. It'll still be number 1. It may even go so far as to be number 1 again the following week, although given the early reviews and word of mouth on Us from Jordan Peele, that'll be a tough fight. I think we'll be talking about that weekend being a close race for number 1. That about wraps it up for us here this week on The Weekend Take. I want to thank Eric Vollweiler for calling in to tell us a bit more about what he does and himself as a producer and marketing consultant for film festivals and entertainment events. The Weekend Take is on social media as well. We're on Twitter at Weekend Take. We're on Facebook at www.facebook.com/The Weekend Take. And please check out our Patreon page at www.patreon.com/The Weekend Take, where for as little as $1 you can become a patron of the Weekend Take and get exclusive access to extended cuts of the episodes if you want to hear more of the conversation had this week and any of the previous weeks with some of our guests. That about does it for me, so until next week, I hope everyone enjoys their week ahead, and we'll see you all next time. Take care. Bye.
You've been listening to The Weekend Take. Be sure to subscribe on iTunes and Google Play and follow us on Facebook and Twitter. Visit our Patreon page to become a patron of The Weekend Take, and for as little as $1, you'll receive exclusive content and perks.